Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. It was translated by Martin Abegg Jr., Peter Flint, and Eugene Ulrich. From the great Isaiah scroll, the oldest scroll of Isaiah that we have, predating all the work of the Masoretes. And today I'm reading from chapter 7, 8, and 9. In the days of Ahaz, son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin, king of Aram, and Peleg, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to attack Jerusalem, but they were unsuccessful. When it was reported to the house of David that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, the heart of his people trembled, as the trees of the forest tremble in the wind. Then Jehovah went to Isaiah. Then Jehovah said to Isaiah, "Go meet Ahaz, you and Shear Jashub, your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool, on the highway to the fuller's field. Say to him, take care, be calm, and do not be afraid. Do not lose heart over these smoldering stumps of torches, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram, and son of Remaliah, because Aram, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have plotted against you, saying, let us go up against Yehudah and terrify it. Let us conquer it for ourselves and install the son of Tabeel as king in it. For thus says Adonai, Jehovah, it will not stand, it will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered, no longer a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. If you will not believe, surely you will not be established." Jehovah again spoke to Ahaz, "Ask for a sign from Jehovah your Elohim, one as deep as Shiloh, or as high as heaven above." But Ahaz says, "I will not ask. I will not test Jehovah." So he answered, "Listen, house of David. Is it not enough that you weary people, lest you weary my God also? Therefore, Jehovah himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman has conceived and is bearing a son, and his name will be Emmanuel. He will eat curds and honey. By the time he knows to refuse evil and choose good. For before the child knows to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose 2 kings you dread will be deserted, and Jehovah will bring on you your people and your father's house days that have not come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria. On that day, Jehovah will whistle for the fly that is at the end of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. They will all come and settle in the steep ravines and in the cliffs of the rocks, and on all those bushes and in all the pastures. On that day, Jehovah will shave with a razor hair from the region beyond the river. Excuse me, it says, on that day, Jehovah will shave with a razor hired from the region beyond the river, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet. It will cut off the beard as well. On that day, a man will keep alive a young heifer and 2 sheep. And from the abundance of milk which they produce, he will eat curds. Indeed, the one left within the land will eat curds and honey. On that day, every place where there once were 1,000 vines, worth 1,000 shekels of silver, will be grown over with briars and thorn bushes, with bows and arrows. People will go out because the entire land will be briars and thorns. As for all the hills that used to be cultivated with a hoe, you will not go near for fear of iron briars and thorns, but they will be rangeland for cattle and sheep to trample. Jehovah said to me, take a large tablet and write on it in ordinary script, from Mahar Shah al-Hashbar, and call faithful witnesses, Uriah the priest, and Zechariah, son of Jerechiah, to testify for me. I went into the prophet, and she conceived and bore a son. Then Jehovah said to me, name him Mahal Shalal Hashbaz, for before the child can call his father or his mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of the Samaria will be carried off by the king of Assyria. Jehovah spoke to me again, saying, because the people has refused the waters of Sheol that flow gently, and rejoice in Rezin and Remediah. Son, now then, Jehovah Elohim will indeed bring up against them the waters of the river, strong and many, king of Assyria, and all his glory. And it will rise above all its channels and overflow all its banks. It will sweep into Judah. It will overflow and pass through. It will reach up to the neck, and its outstretched wings will fill the breadth of your land, Emmanuel. Band together nations, but be shattered. Listen, all distant countries. Gird yourselves, but be shattered. Take counsel together, but it will be brought to nothing. Speak a word, but it will not stand. For Emmanuel, for Jehovah spoke to me with great power, instructed me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, do not call a conspiracy everything that this people calls a conspiracy. Do not revere or be in awe of what they revere. Jehovah Tsabaoth, consider him holy, revere him, be in awe of him. He will be a sanctuary, but also a stone of stumbling, a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Many among them will stumble and fall, be broken, snared, and captured. Bind up the testimony and seal the instruction among my disciples. I will wait for Jehovah, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob. I will hope for him. Here I am with the children Jehovah has given me as a sign and a wonder in Israel from Jehovah the Sabaoth, who dwells in Mount Zion. When they say to you, consult the ghosts and familiar spirits that chirp and mutter, should not a people consult their Elohim or the dead for the sake of the living, for instruction and testimony? Surely there will be no dawn for those who speak like this. They will go through it while severely distressed and hungry. When he is hungry, he will become angry and cursed by his king and by his God, and look up. Then he will look to the land, and there will be distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish. Then they will be driven into darkness. For one who was in anguish, there will be no gloom. In the former time, he treated the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali with contempt. But in latter time, he will make it glorious. By the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. On those who lived in the land of deep shadows, the light has shined. You have expanded the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice in your presence as with the joy of harvest, as people cheer when they divide spoil, for the yoke of their burdens and pull on their shoulder the rod of their oppressors. And you have broken as in the day of Midian, for many boot trampling in the tumult, and garments rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for fire. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will be on his shoulders. He will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government will expand and peace will be endless. For the throne of David and his kingdom, to establish it and to sustain it with justice and righteousness from now on and forevermore. The zeal of Jehovah the Sabaoth will do this. Jehovah sent a word against Jacob, and it fell upon Israel. All the people were evil, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who said in arrogance and pride of heart, the bricks have fallen, but we will build with hewn stone. The sycamores have been cut down, but we will substitute cedars. Jehovah raised adversaries of resin against him, and spurred his enemies on. Aram from the east and the Philistines from the west. And they devoured Israel with an open mouth. And for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hands are stretched out still. The people did not turn to him who afflicted them, nor did they seek Jehovah the Sabaoth. So Jehovah will cut off from Israel head and tail, palm branch and reed in one day. The elder and dignitary is the head, and the prophet who teaches lies is the tail. Those who guide this people mislead, and those who are guided by them are confused. For that reason, my Adonai does not spare their young men or have compassion on their orphans and widows, for everyone is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks profanity. For all this, his anger is not turned away. His hands are stretched out still. For evil consumed like fire, it devoured the briars and thorns. It kindled in the thickets of the forest, and they rolled upward in a column of smoke. From the wrath of Yehovah the Sabaoth, the land was burned up, and the people were like fuel for a fire. No one spared his neighbor. On the right hand they were snatched, but remained hungry. On the left they ate, but were not satisfied. Everyone ate the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh devoured Ephraim, Manasseh, and together they went against Judah. And for all this, his anger was not turned away. His hands are stretched out still. That's the end of the reading of chapters 7, 8, and 9 from the book of Isaiah from Dead Sea Scrolls. And in regular print, my eyes need large print these days. But while I did change back to the original Hebrew, the name of our Father in heaven, our Elohim, I didn't change some of a lot of the Hebrew names. We can do that some other time, back to the original Hebrew. But the point I want to make is something that we find here is this is about prophecy. There's layers of prophecy. The prophecy of the house of Joseph was taught in the days of Joseph. There is a great famine in all the world. There was 7 years of fatness and 7 years of famine. But it wasn't a prophecy only of that time, but it was a prophecy of the great tribulation to come. And the prophecy of the one being to be born, Emmanuel, born of a young woman in Israel. A young woman is a virgin. And so we find in the book of Matthew, talking about this prophecy of there be a son born, named Emmanuel, God with us, being interpreted God with us. This is a latter fulfillment, but the original prophecy was indeed fulfilled because Babylon came down and destroyed it, devoured the land, and took Judah in captivity. There was all the enemies of Judah were destroyed first. It was like 20 years earlier. So all this came to pass. But we also keep on reading, and we find in chapter 9, speaking of a child being born, to whom the obedience of all nations would be to. He is the one also identified as Yehovah the Sabaoth. This is how we know in the scriptures, how the scriptures testify of our Savior, that he is Jehovah, Yeshua, HaMashiach.